industrialization, energy, and environment issues. He has been a consultant for several UN organizations and for various government ministries and agencies in India, and has contributed to formulating policies. I invite Professor Nanda to please welcome the speaker and the panel and introduce them. Thank you.
Thank you, Nivedita. Before I deliver my welcome address, I request all the panelists to come to the dais. Good evening. I welcome you all to the Durgabai Deshmukh Memorial Lecture, which we organize every year on this day, 15th July, which is the birthday of our founder, Durgabai Deshmukh. Durgabai Deshmukh was a remarkable lady, and had she been born even after 50 years, she would still be well ahead of time, considering the activities she engaged in, considering the views she had on several economic and social issues. She got into national freedom movement at a very early age. And she was, by the way, got married at a very young age, but she did not accept that marriage when she grew adult. She said, no, this was solemnized without my consent, so I cannot take. At the same time, many years after that, the first non-recognized husband died. She took the responsibility of the widow. So you can imagine the kind of mind she had, the kind of feelings she had for all women. And she was part of Constituent Assembly, and she made useful interventions. And if after independence, lot of our women got rights which they did not have earlier, we must be thankful to Durgabai Deshmukh and, of course, other people like Nehru and Ambedkar. But this is the kind of contribution she made. And I think there are just 10 or 11 women in the Constituent Assembly, and all of them are very remarkable people. That's why I said, if she would be born after 50 years, she would still be well ahead of time. So she established a lot of institutions like school, colleges, Central Social Welfare Board, and as well as CSD that is organizing this program. To deliver this year lecture, we have Professor Madhura Swaminathan, an illustrious daughter of an illustrious father. She has doctorate in economics from the University of Oxford and worked on issues of food security, agriculture, and rural development for over 30 years. She has authored and edited 10 books, including Weakening Welfare, The Public Distribution of Food in India, How Do Small Farmers Fare, Evidence from Village Studies in India, and Women and Work in Rural India. Her most recent book, credited with V.K. Ramachandran and V. Surjit, is on economic change in the lower Kaberi Delta, a study of Palakurichi and Benamani. She is founding member of the Review of Agrarian Studies, a peer-reviewed journal on theoretical and empirical issues in agrarian studies. She was a member of the Government of India's high-level panel on long-term food security. She is currently member of Kerala State Statistical Commission. She has served on the Committee of Development Policy and Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. She serves on the Board of Trustees of International Rice Research Institute in Los Banos, the Philippines. To chair this particular event, we have Ambassador Sham Sharon, who needs no introduction to this audience. Currently, he is the president of these very institutions where we are standing, but he also had a very long and illustrious career in Indian Foreign Service, moving up to Foreign Secretary. But he did not really retire after that, and he was chief negotiator for Indian climate change negotiations. And in that context, he had to develop understanding on many possible issues, because climate change is something that encompasses almost every walks of our life. So, just coming here, we're also hearing a lot of his experience on how agriculture is, and climate change are interacting with each other. So thank you for agreeing to chair that. As part of this evening, we are also releasing our India Social Development Report 2023, which has been published by Oxford University Press and CSD together. But this particular issue volume was edited by Professor Indira Hirway, and she is also here for this particular evening. She is Professor of Economics at Center for Development Alternatives and Associate of Levy Economic Institute of Bard College, New York. She was a National Fellow of the Indian Society of Social Science Research, New Delhi, and the Conference President of the Indian Society of Labor Economics for the year 2014. Her master's is from Delhi School of Economics, PhD from University of Bombay, and major areas of her research include development alternatives, employment, labor market structures, poverty, and human development. And next we have Professor Biswajit Dhar to propose vote of thanks at the end. He also needs no introduction to this audience. He started his career in RIS, Research and Information System for Developing Countries, and he went up to become the Director General of that institute. But he was not pretty too much satisfied, not being able to teach. So last one decade of his career, he went to JNU, his alma mater, and taught there. And now he has retired from there. And currently, he is also the officiating president of CSD, being the vice president of CSD. And as you all might have noted, we have lost our president, Professor Muchkund Dubey, who again had a very long and remarkable career in foreign service and also in JNU, apart from being the president of CSD for a long time. It's a very, I would not say how to describe the situation, that because every year he would be here, So Durgabai Deshmukh lecture without him is pretty difficult to imagine, But we have to accept the nature and the reality. I would request all of you to switch off or put your phone in silent mode. And I will all request you to observe 1 minute of silence to show our respect to Professor Mujkund Dubey. You may please take your seat. Yeah. We'll now offer our floral tributes to Durgabai Deshmukh. We now go to the next item in our program. We'll have the release of our India Social Development Report 2023 by Professor Swaminathan. I'll hand over the proceedings to our chair of this evening, Ambassador Sam Saran, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Nityanand. Good evening to all of you, and welcome to this memorial lecture in honor of Srimati Durgabai Deshmukh. Before we proceed with the memorial lecture, we would like to invite Professor Indira Hirway, who's the editor of ISDR 2023, Director and Professor of Economics, Center for Development Alternatives, to just share with us some of her editor's remarks. You have the floor.
Good evening, everybody. I'm indeed thankful to CSD. Thank you. I'm indeed thankful to CSD for sponsoring this study, give us a chance to do this study. And I'm particularly thankful to Professor Nityanand, who has supported it throughout. Now, the question is, what is a gender question? A gender question, according to me, is persistent and all-pervasive gender inequalities and women's subordination, disempowerment, because they are women. Actually, Government of India has taken up a lot of activity schemes, etc. Welfare scheme, employment scheme, empowerment scheme, anything, but the gender differences and gender level of development has remained more or less same. For example, World Economic Forum has recently come out. Our gender gap index was 122 in 2022, 127 in 2023, and this year it was 129. That means, are we going ahead or are we going back? Now, all solutions have been defined by this problem. So, one of the International Women's Day, I was thinking, what is there to celebrate? But there's hardly anything to celebrate. And whenever you open a newspaper or anything, you find something or other thing wrong going with women. And during that period, when CST approached me, I immediately picked up the opportunity to explore this. We decided to explore the root causes of this and to explore the pathways to reach gender equality. To start with, there are two formidable structures which are coming in the way of gender equality, and these are never attacked upfront by our government. One is, of course, the social structure in the name of patriarchy, and the other one is economic structure in the name of exclusion of women's work, unpaid work, in which women are predominant, out of economics, out of the production boundary of UNSNA. Now, patriarchy, where men enjoy disproportionate power, and this system, and under which men are breadwinner and women are homemaker, essentially. Even if woman is not doing that work actually, the responsibility lies with her. So this division persists more or less everywhere. And that's why the responsibility of unpaid domestic services and unpaid care falls on women. Exactly the same work of women in which they are dominant, that is excluded by our United Nations national income system. Because the production boundary or macroeconomics or national income accounts excludes this from macroeconomics. So there is no visibility, there is subordination, there are no policies, no programs to improve this work, and not even a desire to take it to the national level as a policy making thing. This basic idea, this conceptual framework was developed by all of us, our authors. Padmini Swaminathan, for example, she said that any development process should incorporate fundamental social transformation which heads to greater internal equality to men and women. Similarly, Govind Kelkar also says the same thing, that right of development, right to own any land or any asset is not there with the women because of patriarchy. And then we have a large number of scholars who are working on this subject in India and outside, joined this, and we have done this report with a lot of efforts. For example, how the labor market functions. The labor market functions, labor market theories don't think of unpaid work at all. They think of human capital theory, discrimination theory, but don't think of any any source of this in the theory, and that's why we don't know how things happen. Labor market theory will never touch the aspect of unpaid work and patriarchy and subordination. Similarly, Nita examines care economy, and in this care economy also, women are doing paid care, unpaid care, and she says that even paid care, like domestic workers or teachers or something, is supposed to be at a low level. It doesn't acquire high status. Anuradha said it is a very interesting thing to do. She has examined intra-household consumption of food and other items in a family. What governs it and how it moves. And again the same conclusion, that because of the patriarchal norms, particularly in middle class and lower middle class families, this happens, that women get less, women eat last, and so on and so forth. Fortunately, tribals have less of this, because there are more equality among tribals. Thus we find in the field of education, why education is not given to women adequately, because that is not considered to be a value to the family. Things are changing, no doubt, but still, in a state like Kerala, where education has spread so well and things are doing so, women are doing so, supposed to be doing so well, there mostly engineers are boys and women-centered, women-like jobs are done by women. So this division is found in health, education, and certain sectors. Nitya Rao's paper in agriculture also says that they are the producers, because women's role in agriculture is significant. They are the one who cook, and still more undernutrition, malnutrition on women. Why? because of this patriarchy. So all these examination, even including domestic violence, talks about patriarchy. When a violence is done against women, if you go for FIR, that to start with it is because of mostly male dominance. Then you go for FIR, you go for case, you go for court, you go to lawyers. Everywhere the patriarchal biases are playing their role, and women don't proceed further. So in other words, what is happening is that violence against women, etc. Only very one positive paper in this is Seva. They show, Ranana Jhabwala has written this paper very thankfully, and she has shown that if you organize, mobilize them, and create a collective strength, then it is possible for women to work for their rights, and they can gain these rights to an extent. But Seva is one example. Entire country is there. Who will organize and who will do this? Instead, the government also, the Women and Child Department also, for example, it's a well-known theory that if you want to help women in unpaid work, reduce the work, redistribute the work, so women's unpaid work will reduce, and they will be free to do other things, go for education or even leisure, or can take up a job. But Government of India, my own study in this shows that Government of India does not even bother about the root cause of women's disempowerment, that's unpaid work, the burden of unpaid work that women are carrying. And there is not even awareness about it. So some scattered things are there, but there is no comprehensive policy that addresses the burden of women's unpaid work on women, and because of that, the time constraint, the time poverty, the deprivation from human development, and so on and so forth. In the last section, we have data. One is on time use survey, because time use survey is supposed to be a survey technique which measures unpaid work. And unpaid work measurement is extremely important as far as women's work and women's burden is concerned. So that is what has been done. And then there is Social Development Index prepared by Council for Social Development. And both are very valuable because we have shown how exactly they are helping and not helping in measuring and assessing women's development. Now this exploration of pathways has happened in the process. The goal is different. I mean, just imagine removal of patriarchy. It seems to be a very distant, but what are the small steps? That steps are given by authors over here. And even the distant UN statistics change, that is removing, including unpaid work into the mainstream macroeconomics. That is what is needed. That is also happening, but very, very slowly. Right now at the UN, at the ILO, at the World Bank, IMF, all have come together to identify economic policies, social policies, and macro modeling to incorporate women's work into the mainstream and create a new macroeconomics. And I hope that this book is able to create this awareness as to how fundamental it is for women to do this. Particularly if you are a woman, you would know it very well as to whenever you read anything, whenever you see anything, it's always they are burnt, they are cheated, they are beaten up. Anything can happen to them. Every day we hear such stories in newspapers, and we want a day when the sun rises that shows our equality, some progress, some substantial progress towards gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, Professor Hirway, you have spoken with great passion about this subject, and I think we can all understand why. Because while there have been some progress made in terms of achieving gender equality, we still have a very long way to go. And I think what is important about this report is that it really identifies some of the structural issues that, band-aid solutions do not really work, that we have to look at this in its own comprehensive way. I think it has also been quite clear that in the recent past, starting with, for example, demonetization, then the GST, then the pandemic, all these three actually have been great setbacks to the whole objective of women's empowerment, and that is something which has perhaps not been looked at very carefully. So I think this report should be really read by everyone, because I think it is evidence-based. It really looks at what the constraints are in really ensuring gender equality. And, this whole aspect of unpaid work, the fact is that we are moving towards a more formal economy, but those who are being left behind are those who actually prop up the informal economy, which still continues to be the most important component of our economic activity. So thank you very much for bringing this to our attention. I now have a great pleasure in inviting Professor Madhura Swaminathan, Professor and Head of Economic Analysis Unit, Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore, to deliver her address on this occasion of honoring the memory of Durgabai Deshmukh. Ma'am, you have a floor. You would like to speak from here, or you would like to?
I'll go there.
Okay.
Ambassador Shamsaran, President of IIC, dignitaries on the dais, and friends, and nice to see a lot of familiar faces too. I'm very honored to be delivering this lecture in memory of Srimati Durgabai Deshmukh, a great freedom fighter, a social reformer, lawyer, activist, on the Constituent Assembly, as you mentioned, policy maker, educationist, and activist for women's emancipation. So I think, really remarkable and multiple roles that she played, and she fought for different causes during different sort of stages of her life, but with deep conviction. And in that spirit, I hope in this lecture, I'm able to provide an understanding of what we need to do, or an understanding of agriculture, what we need to do in agriculture that can serve farmers and save farming, which was the title, of course, of the final report of the National Commission on Farmers. And I'm going to take a couple of questions and try to give you some arguments and evidence to understand some very common, I think, misperceptions about what the agrarian economy of India today is like. And there are really kind of 3 points that I'm making today, and I'll tell you what they are right away if you want to have your take-home points at the start. The first is that, there've been huge protests, all of you in Delhi are aware, demand for minimum support price. And so understanding a little bit about the context of this, why is there this demand, and is it reasonable, and is it doable? So I'd like to talk about the state of the Indian agricultural agrarian economy, the incomes of the farmers, and what role minimum support price can play, what it does play and what it can play. And actually I'm going to argue that raising incomes of our farmers by means of price policy such as MSP, as well as other policy measures, is not only a moral commitment. I think raising incomes for those who grow our basic food, but can also have very important effect on the overall economy. A second perception is that Indian agriculture is very heavily subsidized. And I think all of you who are very familiar with the opinion pieces in newspapers will know that people write about, whether it's MSP or whether it's subsidies for electricity, that our farmers, our rich farmers, they are pampered, and that subsidies are too high or excessive. And so I would like to argue a little bit about and actually say that subsidy in Indian agriculture is very low if you look at it in international context, subsidies elsewhere in the world for agriculture, for farming, and for farmers. The third point I'd like to take up today, and I think I didn't realize the theme of this issue of the India Social Development Report, but which fits in with that, is the role of women in agriculture and in the rural economy today. So these are the three, and what we think women are not actively participating in the labor market, but actually they're very central in many ways to what is happening in agriculture and in the farming households and in villages. Let me keep my watch here. So India is still an agrarian economy. At the census of 2011, 69% of our population was rural. We do not have a census yet. It may have come down a little bit, the proportion of the rural economy, but I personally feel after COVID and the way people went back to villages and to sustain themselves in agriculture, that we probably have a very small decline. But nevertheless, I think when we have a census, I'm sure more than 60% of our rural population, will still be rural. Now, the rural economy is diversified, but what our studies show us, and these are very in-depth village studies that we have done in different parts of the country, is that 90% of rural households participate in agriculture in some way. So, and I say agriculture here, I mean agriculture, livestock, horticulture, fisheries, all what we use the general term allied activities. So agriculture may not be the main source of income, and in fact, what I'm going to tell you next is how crop incomes are actually low and declining, but agriculture remains a part of the livelihoods of almost every household living in a rural area. So it plays a bigger role in that sense in the rural economy, even as the share of GDP or the share of income from agriculture is, in our overall economy is declining. Now what I'm going to argue is that a large number or large majority of rural households, particularly those engaged in farming, barely earn adequate incomes and face enormous precariousness in their livelihood. Now, in a recent ICR lecture, Dr. Ramesh Chand argued that there is no evidence of a profit squeeze at the national level, though it may be the case in some states, he said, a profit squeeze in agriculture, in farming. And I wish to differ, and I'm going to argue that there are clear signs of a profit squeeze of low and variable or precarious returns from agriculture for the large majority of cultivators. It's in the evening now, and I don't want to give you too many numbers. They're written in my lecture, but I'll just give a flavor of a few numbers. In 2012-13, the Situation Assessment Survey of Farmers, which is the first time we had a survey of incomes of farming households, the first time since independence, though we have a very good statistical system, or had one. The monthly income was 6,000 rupees, and this went up to 10,000 rupees about 6 years later in 2018-19. So this is a 56% increase in nominal terms, and actually in real terms, that is after adjusting for inflation, it was only 18%. Now, if you look at the very, what we call marginal farmers in official classification, large majority of Indian farmers having 1 hectare or less and cultivating 1 hectare, their real incomes actually declined between 12-13 and 18-19. We don't have anything more recent. Now, this is the monthly household income. Now, actually, the share of crop income in this is even smaller and further declining. So, for example, for those, I'm not taking those with less than 1 hectare, because these are people who are really now depending on incomes from outside agriculture, from construction labor or other kinds of work. But if we take slightly larger cultivators, say those with 2 to 4 hectares of land, which is large in India, not elsewhere in the world, you find that in real terms over this period, 2013 to 2018-19, incomes from crop production or from agriculture, allied activities actually declined by about 4%. So I think the point that I'm making here is that even by official statistics, average incomes of cultivators in India, particularly small cultivators, small farmers, is low. It's declined in real terms, and it is becoming a smaller and smaller share of the income of the household. That is not surprising, because given the unviability of agriculture, cultivator households have to seek income from other sources. I want to give you a few different numbers from a set of village studies, actually about 21 villages that with the Foundation for Agrarian Studies, a small organization in Bangalore, but some of the collaborators are here today, have been studying in 12 states of India. And again, I'm not going to give you so much numbers as what are the flavor of agriculture and agricultural incomes that we get. One of the very striking findings of our study is that whether it's a village in Rajasthan, or it's a village in Tripura, or it's a village in Andhra Pradesh, a section of farmers make losses every year. They have negative incomes because they've spent on agriculture, they've spent on cultivation, whether it's on the seeds or the fertilizer or the labor, and then either there's a crop loss, there's a flood, it could be a natural disaster, it could be a pest attack, it could be low yield, it could be a price crash, multiple reasons, and I'm not going to go into that here. But I think this was very telling, that whether it's an irrigated village, whether it's a rain-fed village, of course these proportions are much higher in rain-fed villages, but one of the highest proportion of losses was in Guntur district, the village that we studied, and that was a different reason. I'll come to that in a minute. So this shows you that if you are a small farmer without the means to survive a loss, a disaster year, then you're going to be in real trouble, you're going to be indebted, and there are going to be all kinds of other problems. So it may not be the same villages, the same crops, the same farmers who suffer losses every year, but there is a substantial section of farmers in India who are actually making losses. And this is something, when we're talking about pampering farmers, it's sort of good to sort of come back to this statistic. The second point I want to make is that it's a related point, but I think it's also something which we don't see in the official statistics or in the macro discussion, is that I was telling you about this village in Andhra Pradesh, in Anantavaram in Guntur district. Who were these farmers who were making losses? They were actually tenant cultivators, and very specifically, they were Dalit tenant cultivators. And this is something, again, that our studies have shown, which surprised us, that in several villages that we have studied, Dalit households, cultivator households, make lower incomes, and these are statistically significant differences, than non-Dalit cultivators. Now, there are many reasons for these, but I think these are kinds of issues that we are not seeing anywhere in policy discussion, whether when we talk about minimum support price or other policies. One of the reasons, of course, is that Dalit households don't own their land, they're leasing in land, and they have to pay a substantial amount of rent. But there are other reasons. They don't own tractors, they've got to hire them in, and so on. The other findings, so this is to give you a flavor of sort of low incomes. They are not that everybody has low income. There is a section of farmers who are making profits, but it's a very small section. It varies by crop, varies by region, but it is very far. It is really a minority of cultivators. The second point is that over time, and this is what I had mentioned earlier, you see a profit squeeze. Now, how we have defined profits here is ratio of the value of output to the cost of production. So the gross value of output, which is the output time price, this is the total gross income, and what is the cost that you incur. And we can take paid out costs, cost A2. I think everybody in Delhi is familiar with cost A2 and cost C2 by now, or what we call complete costs, where the imputed costs of your own land and labor are included, cost C2. But this ratio, how are your returns, your gross income varying with costs? The short answer is that this ratio is declining. So what it means is that your costs of production are rising faster than your returns, than your value of output. And this is a study I'm quoting here, using official statistics from the cost of cultivation surveys, again put together recently by FAS, and they have studied 10 crops, and this is not just rice and wheat, etc., but urad, gram, rapeseed, groundnut, soybean, some of our pulses and oilseeds crops. I'm going to focus on them a little bit. And for 20 years, 2000 to 2020, and for most crops in most states, the ratio is declining. And I've given some of these numbers in the text of this lecture, so I'm not going to go into that here. But just to say that if you look, so the first is that this costs of production are rising higher, are rising at a faster rate than the returns. Secondly, if you look at the minimum support price, even that which has just been announced in June for the next season, the minimum support price, which is the sets a floor price as it were, does not cover the cost of production plus the C2 cost of production plus 50%, which is the what was recommended by the National Commission on Farmers as a minimum return that we should give if we want farming to continue and farmers to have a reasonable income. The other point here, of course, is that the prices actually realized by farmers, that is, the prices received in most parts of India, less than the MSP. So this is even this is a kind of theoretical discussion. What should the MSP be? Because in practice, the majority of farmers in the country are not receiving the MSP. But I'll come back to this, the role of the MSP later. Let me turn to the second set of issues, which is to do with subsidies and production requirements. Because I think the whole discussion of agriculture, of the costs of farming, of subsidies for farming, has to be premised on our understanding of the production requirements in India. And here I will say very clearly that a country of India's size, we have to be self-sufficient in a large number of commodities, or around self-sufficient. We can't be dependent. Today, we are importing oils, we are importing pulses. I'll just give you the numbers which I have put up here in 2021, India spent $2,000 million on import of pulses and $11,000 million on import of edible oils. Last month in June, there was a news announcement that the government is going to import 11 lakh tons of chana from Australia, and so on. So I think when we talk about the agrarian economy, we need to understand the production question. And I think that we had this epochal change, which was the Green Revolution, and it has given us some kind of self-sufficiency in rice and wheat. But if we are talking today about a more diversified diet, if we're talking about having pulses or lentils or dals, which is the main source of protein for many Indians, oil seeds, fruit, vegetables, then we have to actually ensure this diversified food basket. So it's not necessarily that you keep supporting in the same way, the same crops in the same regions, but agriculture as a whole, basic commodities that we need require support if we are going to have to increase, if you're going to ensure higher production in India. Now, is Indian agriculture today highly subsidized? In 2017, the European Union spent $74 billion per year as agriculture subsidies. And the US spent about $118 billion. Now, of course, the US subsidy, $118 billion, the package could only have increased, it couldn't have decreased, knowing the US, is spent on 2 million farmers, because that's all the farmers that they have. Now, in 2018, Indian agriculture was subsidized, total agricultural subsidies, $56 billion. I've taken this from Sachin Sharma, I think, who knows, who works on foreign trade and WTO and knows these numbers. But 50, so it's about half the US subsidy of that year. And we are talking about hundreds of millions of farmers, whereas the US is subsidizing 2 million farmers. So I think when we talk about subsidies, the first thing is to sort of step back a little and take a global perspective on this. And we can go more into this, but there are other, how the US is measuring subsidies and so on. But I don't want to go on in detail into that. And actually, a recent OECD report, which has calculated support, producer support to farmers or to producers, says that net support to producers in India has been negative through the last 2 decades. India provides subsidies like for electricity or fertilizer or PM Kisan, cash transfers, but even the PM Kisan is 6,000 rupees per year. It's nothing to talk about. Agriculture is taxed in many ways, and as a result of this, the net support that agriculture gets is actually negative in India. So in India, it is actually consumers who benefit from subsidies to agriculture. Because let me take the example of wheat, as production increased, real prices declined. So actually it is consumers who can spend less on their rice and chapati and can spend more on other commodities. Now, I won't go into more of these subsidy numbers. Again, as I said, these are in the paper. Now, in 1998, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, had an agreement on agriculture. And after signing this agreement, the whole debate on subsidies changed. And the way in which it changed is that countries like India, developing countries, have been constrained by two factors. The most important is what the West, or rather what neoliberal economists call trade or market distorting subsidies. So this agreement does not approve of or wants reduction of subsidies which are in some way related to the market. So if the fertilizer price is changed, or if the price that the farmer receives is changed for the output through minimum support price, these kind of subsidies are not desirable and have to be reduced by all countries who've signed the agreement, and India has signed the agreement. Whereas direct cash transfers, which is what the European Union does, or which is what the United States does, you can give as large transfers by checks to farmers as you like. And why I'm mentioning this is because I think many of the arguments that are being made today by economists like Ashok Gulati are related to this. I mean, subsidies are being attacked, price support is being attacked because of its link with the WTO, and we need to understand that that is different. That is an issue which is an unfair trade agreement, and how we approach that question is different from what is the kind of subsidy that is feasible in India and desirable, because the minimum support price is an incentive for production. So one more point I'd like to make here, and then I'll move on to the last point I want to make today, is that if you look at the projections for demand, Niti Aayog has recently come out with a report on demand and supply in 2047, where even with a business as usual, so if you continue the growth rates that we have of production of different commodities, except rice and wheat, we are going to be short of edible oils, we are going to be short of pulses, we are going to be short on many commodities. So in fact, we need, if anything, increased incentives, increased subsidies, if we want to meet the shortfall in this diversified crop basket. Now, there are a lot of environmental questions about farming, and we were discussing a few at tea before coming here, and that is not the issue of my lecture, but I'd just like to say one thing. It's very important that, you know, in every phase of development, we learn from the lessons of the past, and we have to correct and address issues such as, say, water use, excessive water use. But I want to say also here, because I believe this is very important in any debate or discussion on where do we go from here, how does Indian agriculture change? We need more production of many commodities. We also need to continue with production of wheat and rice. We can't give up on that. But what are the new ways in which we're going to produce these crops? I want to say that it's very important to use the latest scientific practices and technologies. And we have many which are coming up. For example, I know in the case of rice, we have some direct seeded rice. So you use less water for transplanting, or you have more balanced application of nutrients. You have gene-edited crops, which actually are very climate friendly and can reduce the carbon footprint. So I think we have to be open to all new technologies. And if not, if today you tell me that I want to replace rice or even half the rice allocation in the PDS, 5 kilos, with millets or with ragi or jawar or any other millet, you'll have to find 3 times the amount of arable land that we are using to cultivate rice and wheat today, which means deforestation, which means an environmental cost. So when we talk about environmental costs, I think we need to have a balanced view, and we also, I personally believe that, it's not going back to natural farming that's going to get us out of the crisis we're in today. We have to look at all forms of modern technology. The last point I want to make, but which I think is very important and links with what we've been talking about, and I think in tribute to the work of Srimati Durgabai Deshmukh, is about the role of women in agriculture. Now, we know that in official statistics, women are undercounted, and I think I'm going to shorten my talk here because you'll find much of it in the report that has been released today, and Professor Indira, Hirway and others have worked on this. Labor force participation, or what we call labor force surveys, do not count women workers accurately for many reasons, but one very important one being, and I think which needs to be underlined, is a large part of this work is on the farm, in the homestead, and women are doing this work while taking part in other activities like childcare or cooking and other care activities. So capturing this is very different. And time use surveys, which are also discussed in this report, where a woman or a man is asked, what did you do in the last 24 hours? Not, are you a worker, or how many hours did you work, or what was your status in the last week or the last year? These are better able to capture women's work. So I think this is something that we have learned, and I'm not going to go into this, except to say that a time use survey that we did in Karnataka, I think what's a very important point is that when we say women are not in the labor force, the reality is that women are opting out of the workforce because there is a crisis of employment. So when there is no employment available, the woman is not going to say, I'm seeking work, I'm unemployed. She says, no, I'm not working. So I think this is very important, that the crisis of employment that we are all talking about today, about youth employment, about urban employment, and so on, there's a crisis of employment for rural women as well. And I think some of you in the audience know this, that how the women in self-employment is the part of the women's labor force that is actually going up. I want to say something else, which is again evidence that we don't find so much from official statistics, whether it's time use or whether it's labor force surveys, and which we have found in our in-depth village studies in different parts of the country. One is when you go to what we call rural worker households or manual worker households, the majority of households in rural India are actually dependent on wage employment. Now, when you go to such households, women's work participation is very high. And in fact, we find on average, it's 40. That means for every, in many households, there's one male worker, there's one female worker. So a typical scheduled caste wage labor household, both a man and woman of the couple, say, are equally employed or equally wanting to participate in the labor market. Whether they get employment and they get adequate employment is a different question. But it's not some time in rural areas. You'll never come back saying, rural women are not workers. You'll find that that's an absurd proposition to make. Second, and very important to, I think, today's discussion on agriculture is women are largely in activities relating to agriculture, both field labor and on their own farm or working for others on their farm in weeding, transplanting, harvesting, but also in many of the allied activities, particularly livestock rearing. One of the studies by my student found, if there is a rural household with a cow or a buffalo, you can be sure the woman is actually engaged in rearing that animal. Now, it may be 2 hours a day on some days, it may be 6 hours a day on some days, it may be throughout the day, starting with feeding the animal for 20 minutes and milking 2 hours later and bathing 3 hours later. But it is actually, I was just calculating as I was coming here, the average we found is 2 hours a day, but it's every day of the year. You can't not feed the animal like a child. You can't leave the animal unfed. That comes to about 700 hours, 710, right? 730, sorry, a year, which if you take a 7-hour day, which is I think what we should take for manual work in rural India, it's 100 days of employment. So women are actually working for 100 days in livestock rearing and are not recognized as such. And we looked at the livestock policy of 2002, and there's no mention of gender, which is not a surprise. But I think till we recognize who is it who is working in agriculture, who is working in livestock rearing, we'll not be able to identify policies to address their constraints. The last point I want to make on women workers, and then I will try to conclude or sum up, is that, and I think this is a very important feature, something that we're aware of, which is a gender gap in wages. And I think, as was mentioned, you have a gender gap in wages, whether it's the United States or whether it's, Vietnam, or whether in all countries of the world, whether it's urban or rural. But I want to talk here, give an example of what is the implication of this gender gap on women's wages in rural areas. I mean, how low is a woman's wage? And there's a very useful recent paper by IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute, in the India office, that has worked out the cost of a healthy diet. So this is not the cost of the minimum calories that you need to survive, but the cost of a diet where you actually have the right amount of proteins, you have fruit, you have vegetables, you have cereal, you have milk, eggs, you have what is recommended by the National Institute of Nutrition in India. And they did this calculation for 2011-12, because till last month, that was the data statistics that we had on household expenditure, consumption expenditure. So in 2011, so I'm sorry, we're talking about a long time ago, but in 2011, the cost of a healthy diet for one person, for a woman, was 42 rupees a day in Gujarat. And the daily wage labor of a rural woman in Gujarat was 42 rupees. In other words, this woman worker would have to spend 100% of her wage on her own diet if she wanted a healthy diet, let alone feeding her children or other members of the family. And as we know, you don't get employment for 365 days in the year, so you have to use that wage for other days as well. So the woman had to spend 100%. In Bihar, it was 97%, and in Kerala, it was 70%. So there were variations across states. And if you take men, wage worker in Bihar would have to spend about 66 or 67%. The same goes for Gujarat, to get a diet for one person, the healthy diet for one person, not for the family. And only in Kerala, it was either 25 or 30%. It was sort of a relatively reasonable proportion of the daily wage. So I think this is very important. We often, talk about percentages and ratios, and we talk about the wage gap. But what does it mean that, even if you spend your entire wage, you can't provide a healthy diet for your family? And we're now today talking about food and nutrition security, not about food security. It's not just about having the cereals. And everybody's talking about education and how do we make people aware. Yes, that's very important, what kind of diet you should have, but they should also have the minimum wage in order to be able to buy that diet. So, friends, let me make some concluding remarks. I think 60 years after the Green Revolution, Indian agriculture is at a very critical juncture today. On one hand, you have people arguing for removing subsidies because of market distortions, arguments that we are pampering our rich farmers, or because of arguments of overproduction of rice and wheat. I didn't talk about that today, but India is actually one of the biggest exporters, it is the biggest exporter of rice in the world today, as Vietnam is second. And when India banned the export of non-basmati rice last June, the people who suffered, the countries who suffered, were some of the poorest in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, which are dependent on India, also Nepal and Bangladesh, but there some agreements were made, who were dependent on Indian rice. So I think when we talk about overproduction also, we have to be careful. On the other hand, you have environmentalists arguing against modern agriculture, be it the use of chemicals and NGOs or genetic advances, and suggesting we go back to natural farming or traditional agricultural practices. So I think you have, this is a very critical moment because, Indian agriculture as we know it today is being attacked with two very different kinds of arguments and different perspectives. What I think what I've understood over the last 30 years of working on agriculture, traveling and living in different parts of India, rural India and villages, and studying them, is that there is a small section of agriculture which is doing well. We know production of milk and livestock and fisheries is increasing. There is a section of rich farmers, of capitalist farmers who are making profits, but the majority of cultivators in India today who are having maybe 1 hectare, 2 hectare, or maybe even 3 or 4 hectares in a rain-fed area, I think that doesn't matter too much whether you have 2 hectares or 4 hectares, are failing to generate. For them, agriculture is not viable. The question, of course, you can say is why are they still in agriculture? And that's a different lecture, but that's because they don't have there's no other source of employment for them. And at the same time, they are contributing, the very important contribution to our production. So I think, and as I see it in the near future, at least 20 years, as far as I can see, it may not be 60%, may come down to 50 or something, but we are going to have a significant section of the rural population who are cultivating small plots of land. And I think we have to, as I said at the beginning, raise incomes by providing different kinds of incentives. You can decide what form that should take and lowering costs. And I think increasing the incomes, I want to change the debate on subsidy here and put it this way. Increasing the incomes of rural women cannot be viewed as a subsidy. It's not a subsidy, If you see the work that the rural women are doing, not just in terms of the hours of work, but in terms of provision of our basic food needs, in terms of the crop production, in terms of livestock production. So these are our annadatas, and giving them subsidies we can't see the support that needs to be given to them as a subsidy. It's provision of a basic adequate income. And rural men also, but I wanted to emphasize the women. So coming to what forms of support we need, this is again a matter of big debate, but I would like to just make 2 points. These are my final 2 sort of policy recommendations, as it were. One is that the minimum support price should be made a statutory price. That is a legally binding price. Many people argue, then entire production will have to be bought by government, there'll be no market left. That's absurd. We have minimum wages. Why do we have minimum wages? As a cons, we believe that there's a floor price that must be set. And at least many of us, I work in the public university, ensure that minimum wages are paid in our organizations, the public sector. But in the private sector, it depends. In the informal sector, there's a lot of regulation that is still needed. But at least we believe that we have to have the concept of a minimum wage. And it's a similar minimum support price is a floor price. If the private sector can procure and should procure, whether it's oilseeds or pulses or any other crop, but this is setting the floor price. And in fact, I think this may not be known to much of the audience, but the first recommendation for a statutory minimum support price was made in the Abhijit Sen Committee, the high-level panel on long-term grain policy in 2002, which Professor Abhijit Sen, late Professor Abhijit Sen chaired, and I was a member of that, and I think this is something that we need to go in. The second step, and I'm not going to give details, but just mention it, is we have to actually step up increase our expenditure on agriculture, on public investment in agriculture, in R&D, in agricultural extension, in irrigation. There's so many things that we need to step up our agriculture expenditure on. Our agriculture and R&D on public extension is pathetic if you look at many other countries of the world, particularly our Asian neighbors. We can't compare ourselves, I think, with China. We're too far behind. But Vietnam or some other countries maybe we can try to compare ourselves with. So I think, I didn't talk about this today, but it's not just a question of price. The returns from agriculture depend on the quality of production, on the extent of production, on yields, on whether these can be resistant and cope with climate change and many new concerns that are coming today. And I think that investing in this inadequate public investment is a very big problem in India. It has been declining, and again, I can refer you to references in this paper. So friends, I'll end with that. I hope that I've been able to convey a picture of some of the, what I thought is popular perceptions about agriculture in India, and that perhaps need to be corrected. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Swaminathan, for really a very illuminating, I would say, lecture. And taken together with the social development report that has been released today, I think it is apparent to us from your presentation how much the aspect of gender equality is very much linked to the kind of structural challenges which we face in agriculture. I also was happy that you mentioned towards the end the need for us to be prepared to deal with the challenge of climate change. I say that because I have been associated with climate change, and that always comes foremost to my mind. I just wanted to mention to you that as part of the action plan on climate change that we were looking at, we in fact had one national mission on sustainable agriculture. And as part of that, we did also some studies around the country. And I just wanted to draw your attention to 2 or 3 learnings that we had. This is layman's learning, so please bear with me. One was that the very successful strategy, the Green Revolution that we actually adopted in the late 60s, which was essentially the intensive agricultural development program. And you had hybrid seeds, you had chemical fertilizers, you had pesticides, and you had lots of water. So in the initial stages, perhaps these were not really, the collateral impact was perhaps not looked at, but we came to the conclusion that by now, actually that strategy, which had been extremely successful in ensuring India's food security, had, in a sense, started giving diminishing returns. And that we were now facing a situation where, number one, overuse of chemical fertilizers was leading to a loss of natural fertility of the soil, that the use of chemical fertilizers or pesticides, for example. You mentioned, how uneconomical it has become for most farmers to actually engage in agriculture as an occupation. Some study that was done by us in Andhra Pradesh, we found that many of the farmer suicides that were taking place not because of crop failure, but because something that should be perhaps taken as cost of production was huge health costs. I mean, they were being bankrupted by hospitalization and health costs. Why? Because they were constantly, for a long period of time, exposed to very toxic chemicals, particularly pesticides and even some chemical fertilizers, with no protective gear at all. So there were massive problems of, lung infections, they had eye problems, and the cost of hospitalization and health costs were not taken into account. as a result of this strategy. And of course, as you also touched upon this, the issue of water security, because the amount of water that is required to sustain this strategy is now leading to, the groundwater levels going down, and that has become, water security has become a major issue. So what we discovered was that in order to ensure food security, depending upon the old strategy, was actually leading to collateral damage in other domains, health and water. And therefore, any strategy that you need to come up with in order to make agriculture viable and ecologically sustainable would have to be a very different strategy from what we have adopted. So that was one learning. Yes, there were experiments to look at non-fertilizer agriculture, non-pesticide agriculture. I know the debate about, whether we should be going in for, the genetically modified crops or what else we can do. What we came up with, and that is the last point I would like to make, is that earlier, if the strategy was focused on crop yield, and essentially rice and wheat, what we did not focus on was the farmer's economy, and that is what you have pointed out, that perhaps in a different way, that it is no longer a viable proposition for a farmer, or most farmers, in terms of, continuing agricultural activities. So what we came up with was that you need to have a farmer-focused strategy, which looks at not only crop production, but also looks at integrating this with, for example, animal husbandry, integrating this with perhaps horticulture. That is, the focus being what are the things which are required in order to make the farmer a viable actor in the rural economy. And I think perhaps some thinking in that direction is what is required, rather than just get caught in this debate of whether we go back to traditional agriculture or whether we go in for modern agriculture. So thank you very much for really highlighting some of these major challenges which we are facing. And unless these structural issues are dealt with, and of which the gender inequality part and the invisibility of the woman from this whole debate is perhaps the most telling aspect that has come out this evening. And without that being addressed, I think the mindset which has led to where we are today, that mindset has to be changed before we can make any progress. So thank you very much for that. We are behind time, but if you will permit me, maybe 10 minutes we can have some question and answer. So if there are any questions, I will take 3 questions together. Please identify yourself, ask a question, please do not comment, and make your question as short as possible. Yeah, yes, please.
Hi, I'm Saurabh. I'm from Eva Farms. I may not qualify myself as a farmer, but we are definitely growers. All of you spoke about the issues in terms of how farmers are not competitive and the rates. But if you look at the consumers, for example, any of the commodity we deal in vegetables is usually sold 8 to 9 times before it reaches the consumer. So even though the farmer is not getting the price at which they are growing, but the consumer are also suffering because of the gaps in supply chain. So are we focusing on that as well?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, please. I'll come to you.
Yes. I have a brief question. The population bomb. Our population has increased 3 times from the day of independence, and agriculture produced, we are told, 4 times. But how long can we sustain this? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yes, please. Just please wait for the mic to come to you. Okay.
Poonam Dabas, though a student of economics, long forgotten. So my question is very generic. What I want to understand from you is, where do we stand on food security? Are we a food secure nation or no? And secondly, you made a very interesting comment about deforestation. You know, that if we need to diversify the crops, we have to go for deforestation. What happens to large tracts of land? As a child, when I traveled in the train, I saw large tracts of land along, which are just lying. So do we have any programs? These have gone, because of overuse of water or fertilizers. That soil has turned bad. Why don't we move like we used to have the shifting agriculture?
Okay.
Not that
I think there is only one more question, so I will take the fourth question and then we'll stop. Yeah. Oh? Okay. So why don't you answer the three questions and then I'll take a second round.
Okay, very quickly. Thank you, Saurabh. I think there are a lot of studies that, the agriculture is one of those crops internationally where what the farmer gets in the final retail price is a very, very small fraction of the final price. So I think that's definitely something that we also need to look into. I mean, how do we get more price to the actual cultivator? I didn't speak about that because today, but I think in a sense, ensuring these trading networks or ensuring that the trade, I mean, just to give you an example, those farmers who cannot stock particularly perishable commodities have to sell it the minute it's ready for harvest, so they get the lower price. So there are many things in agriculture, there's storage, there's cold chains, and you know better than me, I think, which need to be looked into. On the population bomb question, I think we are already the most populous country in the world. I found this Niti Aayog estimate of what is the quantities of output needed. And basically they're saying, except for rice and wheat, if we have fruit and vegetable is kind of borderline, but if we have business as usual, by which they mean continuing the current growth rate, so climate change may actually affect this production, we are going to be short. So except for rice and wheat. So I think this leads to the food security question, I think, that what does food security mean? If you're talking about food security at the individual level, is everybody food and nutrition secure in India? The answer is no. But today, what I've been talking about more is at the aggregate level, as a country, do we have enough, the basic commodities that we need? And here, it is really only rice and wheat. And we have like sugar. We are produce sugar. But if you take cereals, pulses, protein and oil seeds, we are importing a lot of the other crops. So in that sense, as a country, we really need to step up our production. And this is, I think, also linked to what I was trying to say about deforestation. Perhaps I didn't explain it. Is if we don't increase yields. So stepping up millet production, for example, or stepping up production of, let's say, arhar dal is not just a question of giving a higher price. I mean, that may be one of the incentives that you give a higher price to the producers of arhar dal, but you need new technology, you need to see what are the soils, what is the water condition, what are the yields, how do we increase production of arhar? Is it suitable on the wastelands that you see by the train tracks? I'm not sure. If it is, it could be grown. But if not, if today we say we want to shift or we want to have more of production of commodities which have much lower yields, then that means more land will have to go from other uses to agriculture. I don't know if that is answered, but I've tried to.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, please. One. Later on, please. Yeah.
There is a...
Yeah, I will.
This end.
Please, I'll come to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Madhura Swaminathan. You gave us so many aspects, and certainly, but pardon me if I say, they're like vignettes which don't add up to a whole, if I may say. The whole question you mentioned, given the unviability of agriculture, and then later in the discussion, it there's no question, agriculture has to be made viable. It's not a choice. So now with that central problem, is economics alone? Economics is only part of the answer. The whole set of institutional measures which need to be brought in. Even answers which have, like technology. In your agricultural information centers in the district, how well they are able to communicate with the farmer. So you may have the technology in the ICAR labs, but the best network research center is ICAR, and all science fields in India. And yet, it is not. So the other thing is, given the landholding thing you mentioned also, and which is going to deteriorate, cannot get better, the viability question has to be focused on viability of the small farmer. I mean, that's also not a choice. So we need to, is it too much to think in terms of an agricultural policy? A consortium of our academic institutions taking up the different aspects, like to my mind, as an intuitively, cooperativization is a key ingredient, will need to be, because individually they cannot be viable. Intuitively, straight away one can. So the only go is, but that is a tall order institutionally. So I just want to ask you, is that, does it make sense in the whole context that you say?
Does it make sense? Yes, please.
I'm a bit curious because, you know, every institution is working on gender parity.
Please identify yourself.
Neena De Gupta. Every institution is working on gender parity, but we have two forms of labor. One is the non-formal sector and the formal sector. The formal sector has heightened the proportion of wages 50-fold within the last 50 years. What about the labor in the agricultural sector? I don't see any changes there. They work through vagaries of nature, vagaries of environment. Is the government getting any feedback as to how they should bring the labor parity together between the formal and the informal sector?
Okay. How to address the divergence. One more, please, and after that, none more. Sorry. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for the insights. The thing is, actually, you were saying that if we go back to the old practices of agriculture, like leaving the technology, we are adopting, our farmers adopting nowadays. So if we go for that, then can we feed our population? No. And the second thing is, if we go for organic things, like organic crops, can we even feed our population even then? Because that is very slow and the production is very low. So could you please shed some light on this?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm sorry that we have to stop here, and last word with you.
Okay, I'll be very quick. On the real wage, actually, agricultural wages have been stagnating or declining, the wages of agricultural workers. So I'm sure these are from official statistics. The government must be aware of them. But I think that you've hit the nail on the head that, you know, how this wage disparity is increasing. On the viability of small farmers, I agree on one issue, that it's not just a question of getting new technology or something. There's very important institutional changes needed. And I think I'll just very quickly give an example of Vietnam, because Vietnam has a rice-growing area, very similar to many parts of, say, South India. And earlier they had huge price support, subsidies of all kinds, incentives. They had very basic land reform, like in China, they had the household responsibility system. Then after that, when they started opening up and having more marketization, as it were, they have invested and continue to invest hugely in not just research and technology, but taking it to the farmer, by putting all the advice there, by providing irrigation. Now there's no price support in Vietnam, and they're competing in the rice export market with the rest of the world. So I think, in a sense, we're talking about bits and pieces. We're talking about support price because there are other things which haven't happened. So I agree to you in that sense, that to actually bring economies of scale, to make this viable, it has to be a multi-pronged strategy, which we can't, there are many components of that. But the last, and very quickly, I want to say, Sikkim was the first state to become organic in India. Entire food of Sikkim comes from Darjeeling, not Darjeeling, from Selpaiguri or wherever. So it's not, and it's not a question of organic or not organic. It's not, we have to reduce dependence on chemicals. There's no doubt about it. But I think we have to use scientific practices. Let me give another example. I told you about this direct seeded rice, which is a way of growing rice which uses much less water. The direct seeded rice was introduced in some parts of India and Bihar, and it failed because the seeds they were using were the seeds made for the earlier kind of rice. And now there are new advances in this seed technology. So are we going to accept these new genetically edited seeds which will work with less water? Or are we going to say, no, we want less water, but we won't take the genetic advancement? And I would recommend to everybody who talks about organic agriculture a book by Pamela Ronald and her husband. She's a biotechnologist. Her husband is an organic farmer in California, where else? And she says, actually, latest in biological science, genetic advances, not GMO now, we've moved beyond GMOs, will actually allow you to protect your plants, have less chemical and less pesticide use if you develop seeds which are resistant to pests and actually have organic produce. So I think organic is also a word which is not defined properly. If by organic we mean just go back to traditional practices and not do anything, then we are not going to be food secure. Very shortly we'll have a food shortage in this country.
Yeah, thank you. So I think all of you will agree that we have had a most illuminating interaction today. Thank you, Professor, for the very, very lucid exposition that you have made of a subject where there are lots of misconceptions and misperceptions, I would say. And your talk has gone a very long way in clarifying many of those issues. And I would also like to thank you, Professor, for also acquainting us with this absolutely fantastic study on gender issues. So taken together, I think this has been a very, very interesting evening. I will now ask Dr. Bishwajit Dhar, the Vice President of CSD, to make a brief vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. It's my pleasant duty to offer the vote of thanks. At the outset, I would like to thank our late President, Professor Muchkund Dubey, without whom, as Director said, this Durgabai Deshmukh Memorial Lecture is absolutely unthinkable. For 25, from I think almost 30 years, he was shepherding the CSD. And every year he actually took up this as his, really duty to get the Durgabai Deshmukh Memorial done and get the best people to deliver this lecture. This year too, Madhura was pursued by Professor Dubey on numerous occasions, and she could not resist that. And we are very grateful to her that she accepted the invitation, and she's here, of course. Professor Dubey is not here to listen to this wonderful lecture. I'd like to thank Ambassador Shamsaran, President of IISc, and his entire team in IISc for being part of this endeavor, supporting CSD to host this event, and we've been doing it year after year. I'd like to also thank the director and all colleagues in CSD for making this event happen and doing it so, efficiently. And of course, Professor Indira Hirway, she was finally able to release or to see the release of her, labor of love, and this has taken four years to get this report done. It was supposed to be out in 2020, and it's 24 that it is we may be able to release it. And thank you, ma'am, for your patience to be with us, and that it has been done. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you, because without you, this event would not have been successful. Thank you for participating so wholly into this in this event and asking questions and making this event more relevant in this, at this particular juncture. Agriculture needs new thinking, and Professor Swaminathan has provided a lot of room, food for thought, literally, I think, for us to think of new ways of rethinking agricultural policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vishwan. So we have now come to the end of our session. Thank you. Thank you very much. I was wondering whether...